One thing we forgot to do in the last tutorial video was to make sure the UI Manager was set up in the AWS Manager as a reference. And we do that the same way that we set up the File Manager. That is creating a tag, which I've already done here. So you will create a tag called UI Manager, and you will set the UI Manager game object tag slot to the UI Manager tag that you create. And then when we go back into the code here on the AWS Manager side, we can set our reference and then use it further down in the code. So we're going to walk through the AWS Manager script pretty quickly, just to give you a sense of how things are set up and to gain an intuition of how API calls are made to S3 on AWS. Obviously, you want to set your bucket name up to the bucket name that you set up initially on AWS. And I'm going to go into the one that I had set up previously. So you can see here under my buckets, I have IFF CMS and then a folder iOS, and then under that are the addressable files that I've previously uploaded. So you're going to want to set this constant here to whatever bucket name you create. This file path refers to a folder that we will use on the iOS project side. We will be saving the addressable files to this folder. This is something you probably remember from our last tutorial. We set up this dummy test data folder so that we can ensure we are able to upload and delete files on AWS. We'll be doing that shortly. Just want to remind you that's what we have set up currently. But once we finalize the iOS project, we will have a proper path to the server data folder on the iOS side. So that will change eventually. Right now, we have a reference to that in the game manager. So moving along, this is the Amazon client that is used to make API calls. This is the credentials, which you will set up down here. I am obviously hiding my credentials here, but this is the line that you would use that I have commented out. These X's represent the secret key that you will receive from the CSV file you'll download once you set your credentials up, and we cover that in the first video. If you want to go back there and recall how to do it exactly, there's a tutorial there that will walk you through. Hopefully at this point you do have this set up and we can then move forward. So after setting up the S3 client, these next two lines of code set up our utility buttons to test the S3 API calls. We will first look at the two methods, delete all objects and upload all objects, before we review the code related to the wait for hash to change method. Let's expand this area here for button handlers, and let's look at the delete all objects button handler first. First thing to notice is that it is an async method. Recall that we are using the Unitask plugin for all of our async functionality, so you should have that plugin installed at this point. If you do not, please pause and do so now. That was covered in a previous video. Assuming you have that installed, this handler is an async method because it is awaiting the response from the S3 API call, delete all objects async. So let's look at the definition for that method. Okay, so now we're in our AWS S3 API calls. This one, the delete all objects. And we'll just go down and take a look at what's going on here. So first, we create variables for a request and a response. We then loop through all the response objects that are returned from the AWS S3 bucket until no more are returned, i.e. the response is no longer truncated, meaning the response is complete. For each response object in our bucket, we will call another async method called delete object async, and that's going on right here. As you can see, we're passing in the S3 config, and we're also passing in the given response object's key so that it can be identified in the S3 bucket and removed. Let's scroll up to look at the delete object async, which is pretty straightforward. As you can see, the delete object request is issued to AWS S3 to delete the response object passed from the prior method. Looking back at the delete all objects async method, we can see that it loops through and deletes all objects on the S3 bucket except one called keep.txt. This is a bit of a hack I included because it turns out that if you delete all objects in a folder in the S3 bucket, in our case the folder is iOS, AWS S3 will remove the folder as well by default. I could not find anything in the documentation to disable this automatic delete of the folder, so I used this hack, leaving the dummy text file keep.txt in the iOS folder to prevent the folder from being deleted. If anyone has a better way of doing this, for example, knows of a setting in S3, please share that in the comments. Other button handler, upload all objects. Again, like the delete handler, this is an async method that awaits a call to another AWS S3 API to upload all objects. It is also asynchronous. So we'll drill down and look at the definition for this API call. Okay, looking at upload all objects async, we can see that we are looking at all the files in a path variable that is pointing to the AWS server data file path iOS string path variable that we temporarily set earlier to /testing server data. If you recall, back in the Game Manager script, we set this in the previous video for the purposes of testing. So we can see that we are looping through all files in the file path and issuing a put request to the S3 bucket, which uploads the object, i.e. file, to the AWS S3 bucket. That's happening right here. Now that we have an intuition of how this works, let's run a test on our utility buttons. Okay, first let's look at the S3 bucket iOS folder to see that it has 5 objects in it. Once we run the delete objects button from the utility Windows app, we should only see the keep.txt object remaining when we return here. Back in Unity, we're going to click the delete all objects utility button and test our results. You can see here in the console, we're showing that some deletion is happening. We'll go back to our bucket and refresh the window. And we now see that in this iOS folder on our bucket, only object remaining is keep.txt. So we have success. Let's look at the testing server data folder and see that we have 4 files in here that we will be uploading to S3. Back in Unity, we will click the Upload All Objects utility button. We see that uploading is occurring, and now we will go back to the web browser and ensure that this folder contains the 4 new objects. And we have success. The 4 objects were successfully uploaded automatically by the Unity utility button. We are now ready to move on to looking at how the folder monitoring part of the AWS Manager code will handle deleting and uploading of files automatically when they are updated by the iOS app project that we have yet to review. We will get into the detail in the next part of this tutorial. Please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so you'll be notified when the next part of this tutorial becomes available.